How does a guy who, like, actively despises the craft of acting become the single greatest actor of the 20th century?
I mean, it's the ultimate Hollywood paradox, right?
Yeah.
You have someone who fundamentally changed the DNA of American cinema. He influenced literally every performer that came after him. And yet,
Spent his whole life running away from it.
exactly, running away from the very profession that made him a global icon.
He practically tried to burn his own career to the ground, like multiple
Oh,
times.
absolutely.
So today's deep dive is all about that contradiction. We are exploring the life, the career, and the incredibly complex legacy of Marlon Brando. And we're drawing entirely from his incredibly comprehensive Wikipedia page for this.
It is a massive page.
It really is. So we are taking you on a journey today to discover exactly how a rebellious, deeply troubled kid rewired an entire art form.
Almost by accident.
Right. And to understand that accident, we really have to look at the environment that forged him.
Yeah, because everything Brando did, whether on screen or in his public life, was essentially born out of a rebellion against authority.
Which started really early.
It did, combined with this desperate, deeply buried need for acceptance that, goes right back to his childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because looking at the sources, his early life in Omaha, Nebraska, it reads like a psychological pressure cooker.
That's a great way to put it.
He was born in 1924, right? To a father who was a traveling salesman, so he was very distant,
Yeah.
very strict.
And his mother is a stage actress, but she struggles really heavily with alcoholism.
Yeah, she's frequently absent from the home. So young Marlon actually attaches himself to the family housekeeper.
Which sets up his first major emotional trauma. Because eventually, that housekeeper leaves to get married.
Oh, man.
And Brando is just utterly devastated. He develops these profound abandonment issues. What's fascinating here is how that specific childhood trauma, the emotional neglect, the constant lack of approval from his father, how that actually fueled his revolutionary ability as an actor later on.
Because he had so much to draw from.
Exactly. He was carrying around this immense reservoir of buried, intense emotion just because he had to survive it every single day.
But he certainly didn't, channel that into art right away.
No, not at all.
The sources show a kid who is just a complete menace to any kind of institutional structure. I mean, he gets expelled from high school for riding a motorcycle through the hallways.
Just a classic rebel move.
Right, so his father sends him to Shattuck Military Academy, assuming strict discipline is going to fix him.
Which does the exact opposite.
Yeah.
He is constantly on probation for insubordination. He sneaks into town, gets caught, and ends up just dropping out entirely.
He just cannot abide anyone telling him what to do.
No. Which makes his draft board experience kind of hilarious in a dark way.
Oh, right. World War II is raging. He goes for his physical, and he actively dodges the military draft.
He tells an army doctor he's psychoneurotic.
Yeah, and he claims he has a trick knee from playing football.
Yeah.
But the best part, when he's filling out the medical questionnaire under race, he writes human.
And for his color.
He writes seasonal oyster white to beige.
I mean, he is treating the entire military apparatus with complete contempt. He makes sure every authority figure in that room knows he thinks their system is a joke.
Wait, so if he hated authority and structure so much, how does a guy like that survive the incredibly strict, regimented discipline of the New York theater world?
Well, because he essentially stumbled into an environment that validated him for the very first time.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he followed his sisters to New York, and he took up acting classes largely because it was the first place he wasn't constantly criticized.
Right, the things that got him in trouble were suddenly useful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suddenly, these raw, volatile emotions that got him expelled from school, they were exactly what his instructors were looking for.
Specifically, an instructor named Stella Adler.
Yes, he studies under Adler, who was teaching a variation of the Stanislavski system. And to understand what a seismic shift this was, you have to look at what acting was before this point.
It was very stiff, right?
Very presentational. It was about elocution, hitting your marks, projecting your voice to the back row. You basically learned how to pantomime anger or sadness.
It was almost like putting on a mask.
Precisely. But the Stanislavski system, which later broadly gets categorized as method acting, it demanded psychological realism.
Okay.
It required the actor to draw on their own genuine, personal, emotional memories to trigger a real reaction in the moment. You aren't pretending to be sad.
You are actively accessing your own trauma, so the sadness is real.
Exactly.
Although the sources point out that Brando absolutely loathed the term method actor.
Oh, he hated it.
He especially hated Lee Strasberg, who famously popularized the method, claiming Strasberg just wanted to take credit for Brando's innate talent.
Yeah, he always credited Adler and the director Elia Kazan instead. And Adler, I mean, she recognized his genius immediately. There is that incredible anecdote from her classroom.
The chicken exercise.
The chicken exercise.
I love this story. So Adler tells her students to imagine they are chickens, right? And suddenly they are facing a falling nuclear bomb. It's this high-stakes, surreal acting exercise to test their commitment.
So the rest of the class completely panics. They are clucking wildly, running around the room, flapping their arms, trying to act out terror.
But Brando just sits there, perfectly calm, and pretends to lay an egg.
It's brilliant.
And when Adler asks him what on earth he is doing, he looks up and says, "I'm a chicken. What do I know about bombs?"
It perfectly encapsulates his genius. He isn't playing the intellectual idea of a chicken in a human panic. He grounds himself entirely in the absolute reality of the subject.
Because a chicken doesn't understand nuclear physics.
Exactly, so a chicken wouldn't panic.
You know, acting before Brando was almost like pouring a bowl of dry, predictable breakfast cereal.
Okay, I like that.
Every bite was exactly the same. You knew what you were getting. But Brando added water, milk, and unpredictability to the bowl. He just changed the entire texture of it.
He really did. He brought a naturalism that simply did not exist on stage or screen. I mean, he would chat with a cameraman about his weekend, and when the director called action, he wouldn't even start delivering his lines until he felt he could transition into them naturally.
Just seamlessly from that casual conversation.
Yeah, he brought the messy, stumbling reality of human speech to a highly polished art form.
Which completely shocked audiences when he took on his breakout role.
Stanley Kowalski and Tennessee Williams's is Streetcar Named Desire.
Right. And he does it on Broadway first, and the physical and emotional toll is staggering. He is drawing on all that childhood rage we talked about, and he based this brutish, raw character on a real person he studied at the local gym.
A boxer named Rocky Graziano.
Yeah. And Graziano actually went to see the play, having no idea who Brando was or that he was being studied. He sat in the audience and later said, "The curtain went up, and on the stage is that son of a bitch from the gym, and he's playing me."
Because Brando was an absolute sponge for human behavior. And when he transitioned to film, he took this hyper-realism even further.
Like in The Men.
Right. His very first film role, he plays a wounded paraplegic veteran. And he didn't just visit a hospital, he lived in a bed at an actual army hospital for a month.
Just to absorb the authentic physical and psychological reality of those men.
Yes. But the absolute masterclass of this style of acting has to be On the Waterfront in 1954.
Oh, for sure. He plays Terry Malloy, a tough Irish-American dock worker. And there was this incredibly famous scene in the back of a taxicab where Terry's brother, played by Rod Steiger, pulls a gun on him.
And the script called for Brando's character to act terrified, to react with fear to this lethal threat.
But Brando approaches the director, Elia Kazan, and says the script is psychologically false. He argues that Terry wouldn't believe his own flesh and blood would actually pull the trigger.
So instead of panicking, instead of acting afraid, Brando gently reaches out and pushes the barrel of the gun away.
He just says, "Oh, Charlie," with his tone of loving reproach.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. He brings this mournful gentleness to a moment that was supposed to be a standard tough guy standoff.
It completely disarms the audience. Kazan later called it the best performance by a man in the history of American film. Because it wasn't acting, you know, it was behaving.
It wins him his first Best Actor Oscar, and suddenly he's the biggest star in the world. He does the wild one, playing brooding motorcycle gang leader, and he single-handedly sparks a massive cultural craze.
He essentially invents the modern teenager.
Yeah, the leather jackets, the sideburns, the motorcycles. He inspires a whole generation, including James Dean and Elvis Presley. But right as he reaches this pinnacle, he develops a notoriously frustrating habit on set.
The cue cards.
He refuses to memorize his lines and insists on using cue cards.
Well, Brando claimed this was a deliberate technique. He argued that reading lines off cards placed around the set, sometimes literally taped to another actor's forehead, made him look like he was genuinely searching for the right words in real time.
Right.
He said if you don't quite know the words, you capture the feeling of a person really thinking, rather than just reciting something pre-written.
See, I have to push back on this, though. Was this really a genius avant-garde technique for spontaneity? Or was Brando just coming up with a brilliant, artistic-sounding excuse for being fundamentally lazy?
It's a fair question.
Because years later, on the set of The Godfather, Someone asked him why he needed his lines printed out, and he just shrugged and said, because I can read them that way.
Yeah, it is very likely a defense mechanism disguised as a technique. I mean, if you think back to the stage run of Streetcar, he had to yell, scream, cry, and emotionally shatter himself 6 nights a week.
Which has to be exhausting.
He wrote that it left him completely drained. If you are bleeding on stage every night for years, eventually you run out of blood. The emotional bankruptcy of that hyper-realism was too much to sustain.
So he pulls back.
Exactly. As he gets older and more established, he starts building walls. He stops investing so deeply.
Which naturally leads us into the 1960s, a decade that Brando explicitly referred to in his own memoir as his fuck you years.
And the industry that crowned him is suddenly dealing with a man who is deeply disillusioned. He begins to view acting entirely with contempt.
He's just treating it purely as a means to a financial end, right? Just to fund his personal interests.
Yes, and he becomes infamous for clashing with everyone. He horrified Charlie Chaplin on the set of A Countess from Hong Kong.
Oh, and he drove Frank Sinatra absolutely insane on the set of The Musical Guys and Dolls.
Sinatra detested doing multiple takes. He liked capturing the first, fresh attempt.
But Brando required take after take to find his rhythm. So Sinatra ended up calling him Mumbles and famously referred to him as the world's most overrated actor.
The tension was real. But the breaking point for his professional reputation was the 1962 remake of Mutiny on the Bounty.
He was widely accused of deliberately sabotaging the production, wasn't he?
He caused massive delays, ignored the director, drove the budget through the roof. The studio executives were furious. But the irony is, it was during this agonizing shoot in Tahiti that he fell in love with the area.
Right. He actually bought a 12-island atoll named Tetiaroa just to create a physical sanctuary away from Hollywood.
Just an escape.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. He is actively tanking his critical reputation. He is considered incredibly toxic to work with, and yet his manager, Jake Cantor, negotiates this massive, unprecedented contract for the film Sayonara,
Getting Brando 10% of the gross box office.
making him an instant millionaire.
He is failing upward. He is rewarded financially while actively demonstrating his contempt for the people paying him.
It's like a brilliant software developer who resents the massive tech company he works for. So instead of quitting, he intentionally introduces these incredibly frustrating complex bugs into the code just to prove he's smarter than the executives who have to clean up his mess.
That's exactly what it was like. But eventually, the industry gets tired of cleaning up the bugs. By the early 1970s, Brando is universally considered unbankable.
He hadn't had a genuine box office hit in over a decade.
Critics were actively mocking his fluctuating weight, his increasingly apathetic performances. He was effectively exiled from the A-list.
Which sets the stage for arguably the greatest comeback in Hollywood history, The Godfather.
But it almost didn't happen.
No. Paramount Studios strictly forbade casting him as Don Vito Corleone. The president of the studio drew a hard line saying, as long as I'm president, Marlon Brando will not be in this picture.
Francis Ford Coppola had to beg for him, and Brando actually had to submit to a videotaped screen test.
Which is wildly humiliating for an actor who was previously considered the greatest of his generation.
But he wanted the role, so he did it. And the tape is legendary. He stuffed his cheeks with cotton balls to weigh down his jawline.
He darkened his hair with shoe polish.
And transformed his posture into that of an elderly, powerful mafia don right before their eyes. When the studio executives saw the tape, they were stunned. They asked, who is this old guinea? They didn't even recognize the man they had just banned from the movie.
So they hire him, but they still lowball him. They sign him for a fee of just $50,000, plus a percentage of the gross profits.
And because Brando had terrible spending habits and was in dire need of immediate funds, he actually sold back his percentage points to the studio.
For a flat $100,000 before the movie even came out.
An utterly catastrophic financial decision. The Godfather became one of the highest grossing films of all time, and giving up those points cost him an estimated $11 million.
Wow. But it did win him his second Best Actor Oscar. Only this time, he didn't show up to accept it.
No, he sent a Native American activist and actress named Sacheen Littlefeather to the podium.
She walked up in full Plains Indian-style dress and declined the award on his behalf. She used the moment to protest the film industry's horrific treatment of Native Americans and to draw attention to the ongoing standoff at Wounded Knee.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this was a massive watershed moment in modern culture. Brando took the most watched, self-congratulatory night in Hollywood and weaponized it.
He really...
He turned it into a platform for radical political activism on a global stage. He essentially bridged the gap between celebrity and social justice in a way that we now see all the time, but back then it was unprecedented and deeply shocking.
But his next major films showed just how dark and isolated his internal life was becoming. He starred in Last Tango in Paris.
Highly controversial film.
Very. The director, Bernardo Bertolucci, pushed him to his absolute psychological limits. There's an infamous scene involving simulated sex and butter that left both his co-star Maria Schneider and Brando himself feeling, in their words, raped and manipulated.
Brando was so traumatized by the emotional extraction of that shoot that he refused to speak to Bertolucci for 15 years. He vowed he would never destroy himself emotionally to make a movie again.
Which perfectly explains the absolute chaos he brought to Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam epic Apocalypse Now in 1979.
Oh, this is the stuff of cinema legend.
He is paid a staggering $1 million a week for 3 weeks of work to play the rogue Colonel Kurtz, and he shows up on set in the Philippines vastly overweight.
He cheerfully admits to Coppola that he hasn't even read the source material, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness.
And he just stalls the production. He spends days in his trailer just philosophizing and talking to Coppola about the nature of the character while the clock is ticking and the budget is absolutely hemorrhaging.
Coppola was desperate. He had a wildly expensive actor who refused to learn lines, who was deeply self-conscious about his weight, and who wouldn't wear the assigned military uniform.
So Coppola had to figure out how to shoot around him.
Right. He filmed Brando mostly in heavy shadows, focusing tightly on his face, and just let Brando improvise these fuzzy, brooding, existential monologues.
Which really makes you wonder, I mean, by making himself such an untouchable, isolated problem on set, did Brando actually force Coppola's hand? By refusing to do it the normal way, did he force the director to create a much more terrifying, shadowy, and mythical version of Colonel Kurtz than whatever was originally written on the page?
It is highly likely. His refusal to conform to the traditional production process created a severe creative crisis. And that crisis resulted in cinematic brilliance.
Yeah.
That famous whispering of the horror, is iconic entirely because it feels so unscripted, so raw, and so emerging from the shadows. He weaponized his difficult reputation to force art on his own terms.
So we've explored the actor and we've explored the rebel. Let's shift gears and look at the complex human behind the icon. Because the sources document an off-camera life that was just as chaotic, contradictory, and fascinating as anything he put on film.
He was a man of profound political convictions. We mentioned Sachin Littlefeather, but his activism ran incredibly deep.
Right.
In 1968, right after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Brando actually walked through the streets of Harlem with the mayor of New York to help quell the unrest.
He was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. He was arrested at a 1964 fish-in protesting broken treaties for Native American fishing rights in Washington state. And he was also a very outspoken anti-apartheid activist.
But it's important to look objectively at what our sources tell us about his later years, too, because he was also a lightning rod for intense controversy.
Yes, and before we get into this, we need to explicitly remind you, the listener, that we are not taking sides or endorsing any of these views.
Right, we are merely reflecting the source material's account of his complex public statements.
Exactly. So looking at the historical record documented on his Wikipedia page, in a 1979 interview with Playboy, and later on Larry King Live in 1996, Brando made highly controversial public statements. He used slurs to describe how minorities are portrayed in film, while simultaneously arguing that Hollywood is run by Jews, who do not allow themselves to be portrayed negatively on screen.
Which caused massive outrage. Larry King, who is Jewish, challenged him directly on the air, pointing out that these comments played directly into the hands of anti-Semites.
Brando pushed back, claiming he was actually praising Jewish people for their success, but their remarks left a significant stain.
Even though his agent publicly defended him as a staunch supporter of Israel, his autobiography also detailed his shifting, conflicting views on the Middle East over the decades. He was a man who lived in extremes.
And his personal life reflected those extremes. He was openly bisexual, telling a French journalist in 1976 that he had homosexual experiences and wasn't the least bit ashamed of it.
He fathered at least 11 children with multiple different women.
And he had these incredibly unique, isolated personal hobbies. For instance, he actually held a U.S. patent for a method of tensioning drumheads.
Wait, really?
Yes. And he was also a registered ham radio operator, broadcasting under the pseudonym Marlon Brando.
That's wild.
Why the sudden interest in technical isolation?
Well, it speaks to a man desperately seeking control. His public life was entirely chaotic, scrutinized by millions, and heavily reliant on other people's schedules. But a patent for a drumhead, that is pure solitary
Oh,
mechanics.
that makes sense.
And a ham radio allows you to connect with human beings across the globe, but entirely anonymously, without anyone judging the face attached to the voice. It was a safe way to seek connection.
That need for a safe sanctuary really paints a picture of his deeply eccentric final years. He became close friends with Michael Jackson, spending weeks at his Neverland ranch.
Because Brandon needed oxygen much of the time in his later years, he would literally drive around the grounds of Neverland in a golf cart equipped with a portable oxygen tank.
And here is a detail that just stops you in your tracks. He kept the ashes of his childhood best friend, the actor Wally Cox, in his home for decades.
He kept them even though Cox's widow actively wanted them back.
When Brando died in 2004 at the age of 80, his family scattered both his and Wally Cox's ashes together in Death Valley.
This raises an important question. How do we reconcile a man capable of such profound global empathy for marginalized groups and such deep possessive love for a childhood friend with someone whose professional conduct and personal relationships were so frequently destructive?
It's so complicated.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the totality of the sources we've covered today, Marlon Brando was the ultimate American antihero.
It really was.
He was a man who single-handedly modernized an entire art form through an unprecedented display of raw vulnerability. And yet he spent his entire adult life building impenetrable walls to protect a deeply wounded inner child.
He brought true psychological realism to a medium that was previously theatrical and stiff. Before him, men on screen were unshakable pillars. He made it okay for a leading man to be broken, sensitive, mumbling, and completely unpredictable.
And that is exactly what I want you to take away from this. The next time you are sitting in a movie theater or streaming a new show, and you see an actor looking away from the camera, mumbling their lines, or seemingly searching the air for a thought in real time.
You are looking at the direct lineage of Marlon Brando.
Exactly. Every actor working today is swimming in the waters he filled.
He completely changed the physical and emotional vocabulary of performance.
But it leaves you with a final, provocative thought to mull over. If Marlon Brando hadn't been so emotionally neglected as a child, if his parents had been attentive, if he had grown up happy, secure, and respectful of authority in Omaha, Nebraska, would we even have modern acting as we know it today?
It's a fascinating what if.
Or does that specific kind of transcendent, world-changing artistic genius require a person to be fundamentally broken?